Before its release, Fear Effect was one of the most highly anticipated games that mixed a unique cel-shaded style with both the survival horror and action genres. The story kicks off in Hong Kong, where the daughter of a powerful triad member has gone missing, and you take on the task of rescuing her in the hopes of being able to ransom her off to her wealthy father. In a bit of a twist, it was quite refreshing to be playing as what are essentially the bad guys, and sure, they are the heroes of the game, but their personalities and their motives are highly dubious to say the least. Now, Fear Effect plays like the perfect blend of both Resident Evil and Metal Gear Solid. It's basically an action-adventure which incorporates aspects of stealth with action-packed sequences, firefights and head-scratching puzzles. The game's title refers to the health meter, which is represented with a pulsing ECG. It runs at the top of the screen and goes up and down depending on how you play the game. If you are stealthy and avoid confrontation, it will stay constant in green. Engage in a brutal firefight though, and the gauge will quickly fluctuate and turn red, indicating that you need to calm your character down by performing one of several actions. It's a neat little system that at the time was a cool take on the usual health bars you'd find in similar experiences. Now graphically, Fear Effect was a real showcase for the PS1, with fully and constantly animated backgrounds that would loop to create the scene. Known as motion effects, it was one of the main reasons for the game being spread across 4 discs, which really helped ground the cel-shaded characters in what felt like believable spaces. If you're looking for a mature themed adventure on the PS1, then Fear Effect is definitely a game worth considering. Vandal Hearts is an SRPG that, much like Suikoden, bases its plot around political issues such as poverty and corruption. It tells the tale of a kingdom on the verge of a full-blown conflict, as an unsuspecting hero steps up and challenges the evil empire, but is all but ridiculed and forced to take matters into his own hands. Immediately, you'll notice that the story is very engaging, and although it takes itself very seriously, it's not afraid to have a bit of fun, and is made up of some rather comical characters that inject a nice amount of humor into the proceedings, even if they are temporary and fleeting against the overall grim tone of the game. The second aspect you'll notice within minutes of playing is how Vandal Hearts earns its M rating, with its gruesome death animations and literal fountains of blood that erupt from each enemy you defeat. It might be a bit much for some, but I for one love the realistic take on combat, which wasn't often seen in this kind of game. Speaking of combat, much like many other SRPGs, all of the action takes place on a grid, where you're free to manage and move your legion of units that all have their own specific pros and cons. From archers to brutes and mages, there's a lot to contend with because the enemy is just as well equipped as you, so getting used to the way each and every one of these classes work is the key to overcoming even the most trivial of encounters. Keep in mind that this game operates on a rock paper scissors philosophy for attacks, where arrows beat flying, magic beats heavy armor, swords beat archers, and so on. There's a lot of strategy to be had, and finding the best way to utilize all of your units effectively is half of the fun. Now visually, Vandal Hearts hasn't really aged that well, with the graphics and sprites clearly being a product of their time. These issues quickly take a back seat though, and are overshadowed by the brilliant story and atmosphere the game creates. If you're fond of strategy RPGs, then Vandal Hearts is definitely one to keep an eye out for. Tenchu 2 is hands down one of the best ninja games ever conceived. It was a huge improvement over the first entry and provided a well-needed break from the usual hack-and-slash games of its time. It saw you assuming the role of one of 2 different characters as they carried out the dirty work for their master. The adventure was split up into a series of missions that all provided a generous amount of variety and would see you taking on different objectives other than simply killing everything that moves. From finding secret items to infiltrating villages under siege, there was plenty to do, and it was all backed up with an incredible array of weaponry to get the job done. You have several combat maneuvers that are very easy to learn, as well as the use of a grappling hook that will allow you to literally go anywhere within a level. You can scurry along rooftops, grapple onto ledges, and slither along walls while trying not to be seen by the enemy. But when you are, the action is just as engrossing as the stealth. From basic swords to throwing knives and smoke bombs, there's a dizzying amount of options that each have a purpose within the game. Not only is the experience of playing Tenchu 2 a memorable one, but the game's rewards for your accomplishments are substantial as well. You're evaluated on your performance in each mission. That results in a rank being given at the end. Attaining the highest rank of Grandmaster, which usually involves tackling the entire mission without being seen, provides you with a new tool or item to take along for future missions. The way the game constantly deals out these new ways to interact with the enemies and environments provides a real incentive to keep playing that just never gets old. Admittedly, the game is held back by its mediocre presentation vacation, in the end it's a game that really puts you into the mind and world of a ninja that would be perfect to see reimagined on modern consoles today. The PlayStation revolutionized the survival horror genre by catapulting it into the mainstream with the likes of Resident Evil that made a huge impact upon its release. Naturally, this prompted other companies to chip in their 2 cents and try their hand at creating the next big thing, and this is where Konami came in and unleashed Silent Hill upon the unsuspecting public, which quickly cemented itself as one of the most horrifying experiences available on a console. It saw you assuming the role of Harry Mason as he travels with his daughter to Silent Hill for a vacation. Not long before hitting the town, they encounter what appears to be a girl in the road, which results in Harry crashing. When he awakes, Cheryl, his daughter, is gone. The summer atmosphere is somehow being replaced by overcast fog, and Harry is slowly exposed to the terrifying dark side of the town, a location where the surroundings have changed to bloody, rusty, and horrible counterparts. And in your search for Cheryl, you'll have to repeatedly travel through this hell, as well as deal with a wicked cult's dreadful plans. Thankfully, you've got many ways in which to fight back against the hordes of nightmares seemingly come to life, from the trusty pipe to several guns and other inventive items that all have a role to play. Of course, it's not exactly a walk in the park trying to manage every threat that comes your way, and more than not, the best course of action is to belt it the hell out of there. But sometimes you're forced to fight, mainly the bosses that make up the game, and here the various options at your disposal really come into play. From grotesque giant worms to flying monstrosities, there's a nice amount of variety to each of these major fights that demand a full understanding of the mechanics the game is built on. Silent Hill is desperately in need of a remake, as in all honesty, the gameplay hasn't held up too well by today's standards, but it still offers a distinct atmosphere, an incredible story that would be perfect for audiences to experience on modern consoles. Koudelka is an RPG that most people probably haven't heard of. It all revolves around a young woman of the same name who possesses spiritual powers and has the ability to commune with the dead. The adventure kicks off in the late 1800s in my home country of Wales and sees Koudelka being summoned to a large mysterious monastery that has been long rumoured to be haunted. As you would have guessed, it's not long until it all goes to shit and you find yourself trying to survive the nightmare that's seemingly tied to this intriguing place. The atmosphere in this game matches that of Silent Hill. It is dark, creepy, and at times extremely violent. Slowly walking through the dank and somber surroundings does nothing but help pull you further into the tension that slowly rises from the moment you start playing. As with most RPGs, you're joined by a party of like-minded individuals which can all be freely customized. You gain points as you level up, and these can be allocated to increase life, magic, strength, and various other attributes, whereas your weapons and magic can also be leveled up, and you increase each character's effectiveness by repeatedly using them. Now the battles take place on a grid where you can place your 3 characters and then move them forwards towards the enemy. Each move and every attack requires its own animation, which makes the battles slow in nature. In fact, the slowness of the battles adds to the creepy atmosphere, since the place is engulfed with the spirits of those who have died in horrible circumstances. Many of the monsters are truly that, monstrous. The design of each enemy is a real standout and will more than likely turn a few stomachs for those that play it. But if you're fond of survival horrors and RPGs, Koudelka is the perfect mix of both. Capcom hit gold when it came to Resident Evil, so it was a bit of a no-brainer that they would start producing different takes on the formula. Dino Crisis was exactly that, and just like the name suggests, instead of fighting your way through a zombie-ridden city, it would instead see you taking up the fight against dinosaurs. The game drops you off on Ibis Island, a highly fortified military fortress, with the player being placed into the role of Regina, a member of an organization known as TRAT, who's sent to the island to apprehend a rogue scientist. It doesn't take long for her to realize that something isn't right with the facility, and after her first encounter with a dinosaur, it all soon becomes clear. For as insane as the premise sounds, Dino Crisis does a good job of building its story and atmosphere, which helps create one of the most terrifying games you'll find on the PlayStation. The developers clearly took special care to explore alternatives for the genre in practically every way, sometimes merely for the sake of it, but usually with fascinating and exciting results. The visual presentation became fully 3D as opposed to the beautiful but fixed pre-rendered backgrounds found in Resident Evil, and in order to achieve the very foreign yet realistic feeling of battling dinosaurs, the combat was slightly changed as well. A standard weapon may easily inflict severe damage on even the most vulnerable dinosaur, and you were almost always going to sustain injuries in a close battle. However, there is far more room in the game to mix up your encounter tactics. A huge emphasis on puzzles was also present in the game, from concentration and memory style tasks to having to manipulate 3D puzzle elements in a timely manner. It felt like Capcom took everything they had learned from Resident Evil and turned it all up to 11. What steals the show though are the several unlockables that dedicated players can work towards acquiring. From alternate costumes to entirely different modes to enjoy, it's a game that packs a ton of replay value and actually rewards those willing to go the extra mile. After the outstanding Resident Evil remakes, I think it's about time that Dino Crisis finally gets the same treatment. Thrill Kill is probably one of the best games you'll never be able to own, as unfortunately it was cancelled before its release. It was done and ready to ship, but upon EA acquiring the developers behind it, they quickly shut the project down and refused to release it due to the extreme amount of violence it depicts. The premise is simple: all of the fighters are in hell, and the one who manages to win the tournament makes it out alive. All of these characters have unique criminal histories, and even though there's a fair share of dark, serious psychos, there's also a few light-hearted, funny characters that are so over the top it's ridiculous. Gameplay wise, it's not the typical one-on-one brawler like Mortal Kombat or Tekken, with the game operating on a full 3D plane, as you get to duke it out with 3 other characters in a 4-player brawl to the death. Instead of the usual life bars that deplete after each hit, the game is based on your kill meter, which fills up more and more as you attack enemies. When it's completely full, you have a limited amount of time to grab an enemy and perform a regular kill on them, with each of the face buttons corresponding with a different technique. You have to eliminate each character, and finally, when it's down to simple one-on-one, after you've defeated your opponent and filled your kill meter, you're able to perform a character's signature kill, called a thrill kill, this game's version of the ever-popular fatality. Now, the fighting system isn't as deep as others on the market, but this game was made for people who just want to have fun and not worry about deep fighting mechanics. Sure, characters have combos which are fun to learn and pull off, but there's nothing too complex, which is kind of a double-edged sword, as it does devolve into button mashing quite often. Thankfully, even though it never released, there's a fully playable build available online if you fancy trying it out for yourself. Resident Evil took the gaming world by storm when it released, and as a result a wave of survival horror games would go on to implement many of the ideas Capcom produced, but it wasn't until its sequel that the formula was perfected. They took everything they learned with the first game and built upon it in several ways, with the most impressive being the setting of the adventure itself, leaving the isolated mansion in the mountains behind and instead opting for a more grounded approach, with the action all revolving around Raccoon City, a much more relatable space. You get to choose from either Leon or Claire and take on several campaigns that see you trying to survive all of the terrors that lurk around each corner. And much like the first game, you've got many ways to fight, from simply timing your movement to dodge enemies, or deciding to take a stand and utilize one of the many weapons that litter the game. From pistols to machine guns and flamethrowers, you're constantly drip-fed new options as you progress to the end, and you'll need them as not only do your capabilities improve, but so does the amount and different types of enemies to deal with as well. You've got the standard shuffling zombies, which are pretty easy to keep at bay, but once you've got lickers and rabid dogs chasing you down, the stakes are significantly raised, demanding that you think on your toes to come out on top. By far the biggest improvement though were the visuals, with each and every on-screen character now possessing a significantly increased amount of polygons, as well as all of the backgrounds displaying a masterful amount of detail that helped Raccoon City feel like a terrifying place. Overall, Resident Evil 2 is not only one of the PlayStation's greatest games, but easily one of the greatest of all time. So if you've never played this version, it still holds up incredibly well and more than deserves a playthrough. Much like its name suggests, Rising Zan the Samurai Gunman is a game that takes inspiration from both the samurai epics of old, as well as the Wild West stories many of us grew up enjoying. You take up the fight as Johnny, who after getting his ass handed to him by a samurai, leaves for Japan to train in their ways, and returns as Zan, the deadly katana-wielding 6-shooter warrior. Now you're a one-man revenge squad set on cleaning up a baddie-filled one-horse town, getting the girls and living happily ever after. The premise is absolutely ridiculous, but this is one of those games where you have to throw all of your preconceived notions out the window and just sit down and see what the developers have cooked up. Following a quick but extensive instruction area, you'll play through 10 levels that mix target shooting and ninja slashing, as well as some awesome all-button event sections that have the potential to ruin a good number of controllers from the sheer amount of damage they'll endure. It's essentially a hack and slasher that centers around Zan's ability to seemingly mix both sword and gunplay with ease. Not only will you have to mop up enemies, but you'll also have to rescue hostages, use your sword to helicopter around or over pits, and just plain raise hell when you meet some of the wildest looking bosses in a video game. To complement these moments, there's several special abilities at your disposal as well as your basic attacks. This is by far one of my favourite games on the PS1, and it's a real shame that the character of Zan just simply faded away, with no graphically superior sequel gracing the PlayStation 2 like so many other PS1 games did. If you find it on the cheap or are looking for your next game to emulate, then I hope you consider Rising Zan. It won't disappoint. When it comes to mature-themed games on the PlayStation, Metal Gear Solid is easily the gold standard, and single-handedly proved that the medium of video games was more than up to the task of telling intriguing and meaningful stories that would go on to influence an entire generation of players. For those of you that have been living under a rock, the game follows Solid Snake as he's tasked with infiltrating a mysterious island to save hostages and find out if the terrorists who had taken it over have the ability to launch a doomsday weapon. Much like the early titles in the series, stealth is the name of the game, and avoiding detection being the more favourable approach to the many different situations you'll find yourself in. Of course, you've got an extensive list of weapons should things go south, and to also deal with the various boss fights throughout the game, which are the clear highlight. From a cyborg ninja that specialises in hand-to-hand combat to a psychic that can read what other Konami games you've recently been playing. The numerous boss battles are varied and a lot of fun. They provide a fair challenge as well as several memorable set pieces that will stay with you long after the credits have rolled. Now, one continuous criticism the game receives is its short length, which will likely only last you about 7 to 8 hours, and even less on lower difficulties. In my eyes though, this is a game with a hell of a lot of replayability, as not only do you unlock special items by playing through the game several times, there's also a slew of secrets in the game, from ghosts haunting the island to hidden radio conversations that give further context to the world of Metal Gear. 26 years on and countless playthroughs under my belt, Metal Gear Solid is a game I can safely recommend, which is just as enjoyable and intriguing as the day it released. Here's hoping we one day get a remake that stays true to the foundation set by the PlayStation version. And yes, I'm fully aware of Twin Snakes, but the prospect of backflipping off missiles is not something I can get into. Well, that does it for today's video. Keep an eye out for part 2, as that will be coming up soon, so don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified about new videos. You can follow me on all of the socials, which are linked below, to stay up to date, and also join my growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters: Rhino, Skilljim, Shuden, Richard, Amy, Daniel, Dio, Omar, Strider, Pierre, Carl, Awesome Jacket Dude, Maximus, Scott, Alfred, Terry, Ryan, Alex, GameCube Galaxy, Curse Salaryman, Fake, and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, you'll find all of these links down below. As always, thanks for taking the time to check the video out. I'll catch you next time.